Okay, I'm going to introduce our speaker. We are proud to have Gary Porter. He's the founder and executive director of Constitution Leadership Initiative, a project to encourage better understanding of the U.S. Constitution among the American people. It provides courses on the U.S. and the Virginia Constitution and promotes the use of other online and live courses as the needs of the audience dictate. Gary also reenacts King's Madison in period costume, distributing pocket constitutions to school children and having Madison explain his role in creating the Bill of Rights. Gary retired from the U.S. Air Force in 1989 after 21 years of career flying F-15 and F-105 and several different models of gray steel desks. So I guess you had a desk job for a while. After another 20 years of working for various defense contracts, he retired for good in December 2012 to devote his full energies to the Constitutional Leadership Initiative. He's a volunteer for the Foundation for American Christian Education, FACE, which is in Chesapeake, Virginia, and is a frequent speaker at their Lessons for Liberty lecture series. He is now the managing editor of a collaborative book project at FACE, and he continues to contribute to Constituting America, annual 90-day study project, has spoken on constitutional issues to regional and national conferences, and spoken before a committee of the Virginia Assembly. For 2 years, he hosted a weekly radio show, We the People, Constitution Matters, on a Philadelphia radio show. He's married for over 50 years.
Whoa.
I'm sure that's a date on his and has 2 children and many grandchildren. More than 7 now. I introduce Gary Porter.
Still 7. Well,
thank you, Diana. I hope you'll understand my less formal attire. I normally will put on a tie and shirt.
It's too hot for that.
You notice there's none of us?
Yeah, right. I thought it would go over reasonably well. Diana gave me carte blanche as to what to speak about tonight. And I've got a whole slew of presentations I've done over the years. Is this for the recording?
no, so
Because I think, okay, well,
it's on. Just have to. Test. Ready to go.
all right, it doesn't sound like it's coming out, but anyway. So rather than pull something off the shelf that I've done before, I decided to take a look at something that's been on my heart for a while and take a fresh look at this question. Is the Constitution still relevant? And you'll understand immediately why I asked that question and why I think it's important to talk about that question tonight. So we, like any good principal approach instructor at a Foundation for American Christian Education thing, we always go to Webster's 1828 if we can to define our terms. So what is relevant? What does relevant mean? Well, Webster tells us there's an antiquated meaning of that word, but also the one most applicable to tonight is pertinent and applicable. And Webster always gives an example of the use of his words. The testimony is not relevant to the case. The argument is not relevant to the question. So I think you get an idea of what the word relevant means. So let's rephrase the question on our title slide. Is the U.S. Constitution, 235 years after its ratification, still pertinent to the governing of the United States? Is it still appropriate to use as a governing document? Well, I hope you realize there's a growing cadre of Americans who are not convinced that that is a yes. Well, we can argue whether they're Americans or not, but the amount of people who are starting to question the relevancy of the U.S. Constitution is increasing, and some of them are in very key positions to influence a lot of other people. This article was online. He's defined in a new book. Louis Michael Seidman claims that arguing about the constitutionality of laws and reforms is the cause of our harsh political discourse. And he writes a book, he has a book out called From Parchment to Dust, The Case for Constitutional Skepticism. And in that book, he basically says There isn't any part of the US Constitution worthy of retaining. We need to scrap the whole thing, start over, and here are my ideas on how I would write a brand new Constitution. Well, you know, some people are going to buy this book, and some people are going to read it, and some people are going to be influenced by his arguments. So we have to take this seriously. Another article I found, our Constitution has failed. It's time for a new one. An assistant professor of government at American University School of Public Affairs. He's going to influence the students that come through that class and a lot of other people, I'm sure, in the meantime. And on the Hoover Institute website, our outdated Constitution and why we need a more powerful presidency. People are asking very probing questions about this document and whether it should be retained, whether it should continue to be our guiding Constitution. Here's a letter to the editor. The Constitution has empowered anti-democratic forces. It's time for a new one. So because there was a J6 protest, apparently it is time for a new Constitution. Because if we had a proper Constitution, that would not have happened, right? That's the logic, and that's the logic that we have to counter. The final article I found, the U.S. Constitution is hopelessly outdated. It's time to re-envision it, even as its flaws are becoming more glaring. Well, connected to this is a number of people who are even questioning whether America will survive. When do you suppose this book was written? 1988. This was published in 1988. So, have we survived? Yes. Are we going to? Is this nation going to crumble tomorrow? No. But there are serious other books that are asking that same thing. When was this book written? The Plot to Replace the Constitution. 1979, very astute, yes. So this isn't something that's brand new, but I'm here to tell you that the number of people who are questioning the relevancy of our Constitution is definitely increasing. And as I said, some of them are in positions of great influence. A number of books I found on this basic same topic: Patrick Buchanan, Suicide of a Superpower, America in the Last Days, the Constitution and the Signs of the Times, Civil War 2020, slightly outdated now, but still asking the question, are we going to make it? Are we going to make it as a nation? The demise of America, the coming breakup of the United States, and what will replace it. The death of America, the insidious takeover. A number of people are asking very, very penetrating questions about this. Some of them are taking an even more higher level view of this. How civilizations die, how societies collapse, how democracies die. I've got a copy of that right up here with me tonight. It's an interesting book, written by two leftists who believe that Donald Trump is a demagogue and he's going to bring tyranny to the United States. And so these two authors are warning their readers that you've got to pay attention to this guy. So, let me reassure you that rumors of the demise of this country are greatly exaggerated for the moment. For the moment. But the storm clouds are gathering. What are some of these Constitution's flaws that they argue are so grievous that we need to replace the document? Well, you've heard before, and many times probably, that the Electoral College is an institution born out of slavery. It was born to give the southern states more political power than they otherwise would have been entitled to with the comparison of just their free citizens' populations. The Electoral College has protected and enabled an increasingly extremist GOP. So therefore the Electoral College must be replaced. The U.S. Senate gives vast over-representation to sparsely populated states like Vermont and Wyoming. Well, we'll look at that argument a little bit later. A federal judiciary with lifetime appointments allows political minorities from the past, God, the past, we must escape from the past, right? Political minorities from the past to dominate present-day majorities through the court. So therefore, we need a new constitution. The Constitution was drafted in some pre-democratic era, apparently. I don't know, what that looks like, but this is an argument that they're using. And of course, they are so enamored with democracy that any argument along that line is going to be latched onto. So the Constitution is anti-democratic in many of its features. It was drafted in an anti-democratic or pre-democratic era. In its original form, the Constitution did not fully provide for what is now called liberal democracy. Really? This is an argument that they're making. So here's the big question. How do we keep the Constitution relevant in the face of these arguments? Well, we're going to discuss that. But we first have to take a look at this question. Which Constitution are we talking about? And just for ease of illustration, I've brought my copy of the United States Constitution Analysis and Interpretation. This is the operational Constitution we are operating under today. Okay? Now, we all have a copy of the Pocket Constitution. We all know the approximately 4,500 words of the original Constitution. But this is 3,000 pages of Supreme Court decisions that tell us how the Constitution is interpreted today. So which Constitution are we trying to preserve? And if we're trying to preserve the 3,000 page one, then I think we need to consider some other things along the way. So let's return to that Electoral College question. What is the substance of their argument? Each Electoral College vote in a small state like Delaware or Wyoming is worth more than an Electoral College vote in a big state like California. Now, is anybody prepared to refute that? Well, you can find
We're all
arguments.
Americans.
You can find arguments like this and essays like that deal with this on the web. And you should search them out because you should understand and be familiar with the arguments they're using. Because who is going, here's the bottom line up front. Who is going to make the U.S. Constitution still relevant?
We are.
You are. The people in this room, right? You are going to make it still relevant. And you're going to have to convince other people who are sitting on the fence, listening to both sides, that you're right. So you're going to have your arguments lined up. You're going to have to know the arguments that are being used to make the Constitution seem irrelevant. So Electoral College is a big one. You need to be able to defend the Electoral College. Why was it designed the way it was? What were they trying to achieve?
I think that we're not a democracy or a republic, so each electoral vote represents an equal amount of people in percentage. So California, if you didn't have an electoral college, they would have, if you only went by democracy, if you didn't have chaos, you'd have California running our country.
Well, this argument that a vote in Wyoming is worth more than a vote in California
Right.
in terms of Electoral College takes the view that we have a single national election for the president every 4 years. Do we? Don't.
50.
We have 51.
You elect
To be
people.
precise, we have 51 separate elections. And in those 51 separate elections, every vote counts the same, right?
Right.
So you have to take the argument down to the bare facts. We don't have a national election for president. We have 51 separate elections, and each one of those elections, every vote has exactly the same weight, the same value, the same purpose. Yes.
Well, when it first was established, the Senate was meant for the state's representation, not the people. The representatives were ours. So that's how they separated it, and it has been, bad word, bastardized since then.
Who in the original Constitution elected the president?
The electors.
And the electors represented who?
People and the
States.
state.
The states.
So you're electing
The
governors.
electors, if you read the Constitution, the electors are to be selected in any manner that the state deems most appropriate. They don't have to involve their citizens in any way. And in the original elections, the first half dozen elections, presidential elections, the states, most of them did not involve their citizens in the selection of electors. They directly appointed their electors, as was envisioned by the people who put the Electoral College together. The states were given the job of electing the President of the United States. Is that his title?
These United States.
Yes, the United States plural, yes.
Is this, I think it is this, the electoral college business that leads to the fact that the United States is ranked 83rd in the democracy index. I think it's 83rd. Behind all sorts of crazy little countries, so.
Because if you look at if you look at the Electoral College superficially, without understanding why it was designed the way it was, yes, it does seem anti-democratic or undemocratic. But if you understand it in its original context, in its original design, original purpose, then it makes great sense and should be retained for this very same reason. But as someone brought up the 17th Amendment, the 17th Amendment helped characterize the argument that the Electoral College is outdated. Once we allowed people to elect their senators directly rather than let the states appoint them, then yes, the Senate is an undemocratic chamber, and as you're going to see the graphic representation of that in a moment. But the Senate is an undemocratic institution, and the Electoral College is undemocratic as well. What about this argument that the Electoral College was born in slavery? Right out of the one of those articles that I read, or that I showed you, makes the claim that James Madison argued for the 3/5 rule, which is at the basis of these arguments. The 3/5 rule that gave the southern states the ability to count 3/5 of their slaves for representation. But Madison argued for the Electoral College because it would give, for the 3/5 rule because it would give the southern states more political power. Well, this comes out of that book that the two authors together wrote there. When you look at the the Constitutional Convention record, you find that the 3/5 rule was put on the floor of the convention on June 11th, 1787, and Madison's name is not even in the record that day. So they come up with these very specious and false allegations and use them to bolster their argument. But you have to go back to look at the facts that they're purporting as true and see if they are or not. Madison didn't propose the 3/5 rule. Roger Sherman from Connecticut did. And Madison didn't argue that it was necessary to give the southern states more political power. So part of what I'm telling you is go back and check facts, make sure that your arguments are based on facts.
If the 3/5 was true, set up, if they gave them a whole vote or
Yes.
whatever, then that would have been even more power.
Exactly.
So I don't
The
understand.
3/5 rule was a limitation on the potential power of the southern states. Absolutely, yes.
Isn't the Electoral College based off of population size, not voter count or citizen count though? And isn't that why they're putting migrants almost everywhere? Because if you're on the roll of being in the state, even if you're not an elected or a legal citizen, you can still get more. representation
There are 538
right
electoral
now?
votes,
Right now?
based on 535 members of Congress, 100 senators and 435 representatives, plus the 3 electoral votes given to the District of Columbia. So the Electoral College is based on representation in Congress.
Population size of the
Population
district, not
size.
voter or citizen size.
That's why California lost an electoral vote
That's right.
this last time, because their population shrunk. So the Electoral College, the number of electoral votes is based on population and is based on representation in Congress, both chambers considered. So the Electoral College allows the election of a president supported by only a minority of the people. Why is that a specious argument? Is there a national popular vote?
No,
Is it in the Constitution?
no.
No, it's not even a constitutional thing. It is a manufactured concept. There is no national popular vote, but you will see it obviously touted every time we have a presidential election, because it feeds the democracy argument. And the fact that in a democracy, a minority can't elect someone, right?
Right,
Right?
right.
But the Electoral College allows that because it does. So you have to be ready to counter that argument. You have to be ready. Yes?
Hope this doesn't veer off, but surely if we were a representative with the House of Representatives, we would have many, many, many more representatives than we do now. They cut it off. In other words,
Well, yes, they artificially cut it
Yes,
off
they did.
at 535 because they don't have a big enough chamber.
that's the only
Right.
reason.
And to go down a little rabbit hole here, how many realize that there's an amendment out there floating around that could be ratified today that would completely change representation in Congress? Which one is it? How many amendments were initially proposed to the states in 1789? 12, okay, and how many got ratified? How many were ratified on December 15th, when Virginia ratified this number? They put this number of amendments into effect. So on December 15th, 1791, Virginia did it. How many of those amendments, those 12 amendments, went into effect?
That'd be 10.
10, right? Okay, now, 230 years later, one of those original 12 got ratified. And what did it become? You folks need to get into your constitutions. Look at, who's got their pocket constitution? Who has a pocket constitution with them?
I've got one.
All right, tell me what date the 27th Amendment was first proposed. Tell me what date the 27th Amendment was first proposed.
September 25th, 1789.
How about that? And it finally got ratified 230 some years later. Now, what about the original First Amendment?
It was different.
The original First Amendment would change representation in Congress to one representative for every 50,000 persons or citizens. One representative for every 50,000. Today the ratio is one representative for every 750,000. That's the average district in America. Each representative has to satisfy the needs of 750,000 people. But if we ratified the original First Amendment, we would go to a Congress of about 6,500 members. Now, you may think that that's ludicrous, but think about it in today's connected age. 6,500 people couldn't meet regularly,
Could
could
be
they?
done on video or.
They couldn't meet in person regularly, and that's the limitation why we have 435 members of Congress right now, a physical limitation to the size of the room. But if you take away the limitation of the size of the room, Is there any limit to the number of representatives you could have? Would you rather be represented, you and 49,999 of your closest friends, would you rather be represented that way by one representative, or would you rather join 750,000 other people?
Rather have the smaller.
Yes, right. Right, so the original First Amendment could still be ratified today. All it would take, and here's your homework assignment. Everybody ready for your homework assignment? Write this down. You have to go on Wikipedia and you have to look up the history of the 27th Amendment. Figure out how that got ratified 230 some years late. And then tell me, or through Diana tell me, how you think the First Amendment could not be ratified today and change our representation completely to something that's closer to the people in terms of the amount of people the representative has to represent. So that was a little side hole there, a little rabbit hole, but I love to bring it up because the 27th Amendment is proof that one person can make a difference.
It's true.
Because you're going to find out that one person made the 27th Amendment happen.
We need to know who
So
it was.
don't dismiss the power of one person, especially one pissed off college student, as you're going to see. All right, so here's what they're talking about with the Senate and how the Senate is undemocratic, because California, Texas, and Florida each only have 2 senators, and look at the population of those states compared to Alaska, Vermont, and Wyoming, the 3 smallest states in population. How can you argue that this is representative government? But see, this ignores the fact of why we have a Senate, why the Senate was designed the way it was, the history of one state, one vote in the Articles of Confederation. So you need to know your history. You need to know what led up to the Senate being designed the way it was. It wasn't just, let's pick a number out of thin air here, let's pick a concept. There was logic behind this, there was reasoning behind this, and it was a good idea.
They were appointed, correctly?
Yes.
Correct by the states?
Yes, directly appointed by the states until the 17th Amendment.
As of now, because of the 17th Amendment, we have no states representation per se.
True.
That's the problem.
That is the problem. And you can read this in Madison's Federalist 10. The people had their political power and their voice in which chamber? The House. The states had their political power and their voice in which chamber?
In the Senate,
And that is a balance of power.
it is.
And that's a balance of power that was interrupted by the 17th Amendment. And until we get back to that original balance of power, we are out of balance in the Congress. We are out of the balance the founders intended there to be.
What does it take to change that?
It takes another constitutional amendment to amend, to repeal the 17th.
And that takes
Have we ever repealed an amendment?
Yes,
Yes, we did.
a very good repeal.
It was a good repeal, it had a lot of popular support, but we proved you could repeal an amendment.
Yeah.
So all we need to do is prove that once again, right?
Right.
Biden's gonna bring it back.
Now, there's another problem with the current Constitution that we need to discuss, and that concerns money. Congress does have the power, according to the Constitution, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States, right? And they're in Article 1, Section 8, first clause. But what's general welfare? Well, it started out being that general welfare was something that enhanced the welfare of everyone. Not some specific group or some specific lobbyist or some specific portion portion of our economy. Madison warned in 1792, if Congress can do whatever in their discretion can be done by money and will promote the general welfare, The government is no longer a limited one possessing enumerated powers, but an indefinite one, subject to particular exceptions. The phrase general welfare, out of which this doctrine is elaborated, is copied from the old Articles of Confederation, where it was always understood as nothing more than a general caption to the specified powers. What he's saying in a nutshell is the phrase general welfare was to be an adjective to the spending power. That is, if you had the authority to spend for some purpose, that spending had to enhance the general welfare of everyone. In other words, you could not send subsidies to the cranberry bog growers of Wisconsin, because that did not enhance the general welfare of all Americans. And the first Congresses, in fact, obeyed this concept of general welfare. Yes, another question?
Just that if anybody wants to understand the process you're talking about, they should look up Not Ours to Give.
Okay? Now yours to get. And that's on the web.
Yes, it is.
Okay. Here's an example. In 1794, the Second Congress proposed $15,000 to send to the relief of French refugees who had fled to America from an insurrection in Santo Domingo. And these people, poor, desperate people, arrived on our shores with nothing but the clothes on their back. Congress proposed sending them, apportioning $15,000 for their relief. And Congressman James Madison rose and said, I cannot undertake to lay my finger on that article of the Constitution which grants a right to Congress of expending on objects of benevolence the money of our constituents.
Write your own check.
And today we don't blink an eye at sending billions of dollars in relief to our fellow citizens. But that's not the way the first Congress saw it.
And people
Okay.
overseas as well.
Overseas too, yeah.
In another speech, Madison says, charity is no part of the legislative duty of the government.
Amen.
Correct.
So that begs the question, who is charity a part of? Who should be
Your own
concerned about
personal
charity?
self.
Your community.
Ourselves, our communities, our churches, our voluntary associations and voluntary organizations? Yes,
Out of our own
charity
pocket.
should be a part of those institutions' purview. But charity, in Madison's eyes, is not part of the legislative duty of the government. So in 1936, things began to change. The Supreme Court in the U.S. v. Butler case said that this general welfare clause conferred a separate power distinct from those later enumerated. In other words, Congress took this caption, that as Madison had described it, and made it a separate grant of power. So now Congress had the power to spend money on the general welfare unconnected to any other spending power. All right? The following year, in Helvering versus Davis, the case which sanctioned Social Security, the court said Congress may spend money in aid of the general welfare, which we demonstrated last year. Where the line between specific and general welfare shall be placed cannot be known in advance through a formula in advance of the event. The discretion belongs to Congress.
That's unlimited power.
So what is this saying in plain English? Congress can decide to spend money on anything they decide is in the general welfare as they define the term. Do we see this happening?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Of course we see it happening. We see it happening in our national debt.
Absolutely.
And our national debt is unsustainable. The direction we're going, Biden's budget proposal proposed or estimated that in 10 years from 2023, we would be at $50 trillion in debt. This can't go on forever.
has to collapse.
It has to be addressed, and somebody has to stand up and put their big boy pants on
That's right.
and address it. And I'm quite serious in the way I've categorized that. All right, so now, this is a little outdated now because the Supreme Court has done us a wonderful favor in knocking down the Chevron doctrine as they did just a couple weeks ago. And the regulatory state has taken a big hit as a basis of that decision. Because the Chevron doctrine, 40 years of Chevron has turned the United States into a regulatory nightmare. Because the court, based on precedent, had to give deference to the decisions of the regulatory agencies, executive branch agencies, which said our interpretation of what Congress said in that legislation is perfectly logical and reasonable, and the court has said, yes, we're going to allow that.
The Congress gave away their power.
Well, they did, and just like the states shot themselves in the foot with the 17th Amendment. Yes, sometimes things are done without a lot of forethought. But anyway, the regulatory state is still a problem. The cost of regulations on American businesses adds $2 trillion a year to their bottom, their cost of business, right? And they, of course, absorb that all themselves, right?
Yes.
No, they pass every penny of that $2 trillion on to the people who buy their products.
Who aren't even born yet.
Right. So the final problem I want to talk about is lawfare, and that has become a rather recent phenomenon. There is a term, lawfare, that preceded the present little difficulties we're having, that talked about using law as a weapon of war in an actual war. That is, when nations are at war with each other, they can use the law as one of their weapons in that fight. And we see this all the time. Sanctions against Russia, sanctions against Iran. Now it's a Cold War, but we are using law as a weapon. But what I'm talking about today is weaponizing the law to go against your political enemies. And that is a rather recent phenomenon, and that is a matter of great concern. It is happening so frequently now that we've got the Federalist website setting aside a whole page for this week in lawfare. If you want to keep up, if you want to keep abreast of all the new developments in lawfare, you need to watch this website. So,
Federalist.com.
Federalist.com, this week in lawfare land. So do be informed and remain informed about what's happening in this arena.
So you can be armed with what's going on to the people who think that's perfectly fine.
Exactly. So I don't want to leave you with a bunch of negativity, but there is some remedies that I'm going to propose. Number one, I think this should be required reading for every American, the American Covenant. How the Constitution unified our nation and could again. Yuval Levin has put together a very good work. He analyzes each of the three branches of government, the Congress, the presidency, and the Supreme Court, and looks at how basically, how we went from this to this in terms of all three of those branches. How did the Congress become so powerful that it can spend money on anything, it can regulate anything, it can tax you without asking your permission? That's just the legislative branch. How did the president become such a powerful figure that we now put all this energy into electing him? That wasn't the founders' design. Why do we look at the president as our savior? Why do we even care about the personality of the president? Who should we be concerned about taking positions of power after an election? The president or the thousands of people he's going to appoint?
Yes, the administrative state.
Yes, it's not the president. We place far too much importance on the man of the president, the personality of the president. We should be paying attention to who is this guy going to bring with him? And what will those people do in positions of power? Are those the people we really want to have political power? That should be our focus as we approach the presidential election. So Yuval takes us through all three branches, showing how they have metamorphosed into this gargantuan leviathan that we have today, and what it would take to get back to more towards the founder's design. But his biggest argument is that we actually do have to start talking to the other side. As ugly as that sounds, we have to do it. We have to start talking about the common ground that we still have. Because the Constitution anticipated that those conversations would be taking place. Finding common ground and moving towards that common ground despite our political differences and opinions. So the first step obviously has to be education. We've got to educate ourselves, most of all, because we are going to have to educate others. No one else is going to do it. We have to be educated enough to educate someone else. And that's going to take some work. That's going to take some homework. That's going to take some reading of books. It's going to take some spending of time searching websites and searching out information. But it's got to be done. Elect better representatives, yes, but what is a better representative? I'm not sure that we know the answer to that question anymore. Are we asking the representatives who are campaigning for our vote the right questions?
What they can offer.
We need to be asking them the right kind of questions to know whether they have the correct view of the Constitution and whether they are willing to start moving us back towards the founder's version of that document. We put far too much confidence in men. We need to bind them down, says Jefferson, with the chains of the Constitution. But the Constitution's chains have to be reforged in many instances. Well, we could wait on the Supreme Court. They've done some great work here in the latter part of this term. There were a couple of decisions that I might question, but all in all, I was shaking my head vertically a lot more than I was doing this. And there were some good decisions in this last few weeks. But there are a lot of precedent-setting rulings out there. We just talked about some of them. U.S. v. Butler, Halbring versus Davis, Mistretta versus U.S., which gave them the ability of delegating their legislative power to the executive branch agency. Wickard v. Filburn, which allowed them to make anything a regulatable, any business transaction or business activity a regulatable action because it has some remote tentative connection to interstate commerce. We've got to address that. And I'm sure the court would like to address that. I'm sure that the 6 conservatives on the present court are itching for a chance to overturn some of these precedents, previous precedents. But can they? Can they take unilateral action to overturn Halbring versus Davis?
No.
They gotta get it to a
No. They have to wait
For
patiently.
precedent or for.
They have to patiently bite their tongue and wait patiently for a court case to bubble up to their attention. So this is going to take a while before all these precedents get reversed. Do we amend the Constitution? We can. Key clauses must be returned to their original meaning. An amendment is the only option, I think, to do that in some cases. Congress can propose amendments. The last time they did that was 50 years ago. That was the last time Congress proposed an amendment to the Constitution that actually became an amendment. So Congress isn't going to do this. And you know where I'm going.
Right.
Is Congress ever going to propose amendments that reduce their power?
No.
Not anymore.
So we can either say, well, it is never going to happen, or we can start looking at how it might happen. take steps to make sure that it happens safely the way we want it to. All right, and the final step is we've got to start talking to people that we would rather not talk to. I'm sorry, there's no other way to say it. But before we start those conversations, we have some homework to do. We have to know what we're talking about. And we can't let our lack of knowledge stifle us or prevent us from having these conversations. So how do you get good at arguing points that you want to make?
Education,
No?
practice.
We don't think of that. How do you practice making political arguments? Well, I'm going to show you one way to do that. This isn't the only way, but this is the way I've found to be helpful to me. There's an online forum called Quora.com. How many have encountered that? Okay? How many of you are answerers on Quora.com? Okay? Well, I have found over the years that I've been involved with this that I am better able to make persuasive arguments because I've practiced making better persuasive arguments. And you can do this safely, anonymously. You don't have to give your correct name when you sign up for this. There's lots of pseudonyms out there. And you can practice persuading people. Practice gathering your facts, aligning them in an understandable, persuasive manner, and putting them out there. The more you do that, the more confident you will become in doing that.
I found, when I discovered all the things we were doing wrong, that the Socratic method was a wonderful way to
Yes.
address that.
Now, Quora doesn't allow a good two-way conversation unless you allow comments, and I've gotten to the point where I have not allowed comments because a lot of people just, out of a lark, will throw stuff out there that is ludicrous. But you can pick and choose the questions you respond to. You don't have to respond to any. You can pick ones that are really easy. You know the answer, and you know how to address this, and that's where you start. Here's some examples. I get about between a half dozen and a dozen of these every day, and I don't answer them all. Why is the Supreme Court at its lowest favorability polling ever since the immunity decision? Does anyone spot anything wrong with this question?
What's the question say?
Why is the Supreme Court at its lowest favorability polling ever since the immunity decision?
So the person is-
What is being assumed by this question?
That the president is gonna be able to get away with it.
That the Supreme Court's favorability rating is low.
Well, yes, that the Supreme Court's favorability rating has somehow changed since the immunity decision.
Well, who does the polling?
Who does the polling?
Yeah.
See, none of that is, this person, this OP, as they're called, has just put it out there without any facts to back up his statement or his
We need
question.
the facts.
So what do you do when you're responding to something like this?
Show me the facts.
Show me the facts. And the favorability rating is lowest to whom? The conservatives who are applauding the Grants,
Not at
City
this
of Grants
time.
Pass decision and the Chevron reversal. And
Not at this time.
so you can bring these points out and you can show this guy what's wrong with this question and where are the facts. And you can marshal your facts and say, among conservatives, the Supreme Court has the highest favorability rating that it has had in 30 years. And there's a reason for that, by the way, and let me explain why that might be that way. Another question, and you'll encounter some of these. Scientifically, how does the U.S. Constitution institute a three-part king writ large? How does the Bill of Rights as an analysis tie together the preambles of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights? You just ignored that question. It is probably an AI contrived question because it makes no sense at all. And so you just ignore it. It's your right as an answer. You don't have to answer every question. I put that up there just to show that some of these are off the wall and are unanswerable in their present form. So you can either go back and say, this makes no sense, why don't you try again? Or you can just ignore it. Is it time now to be considering invoking the 25th Amendment in the removal of President Biden from office as president? Here's a perfect opportunity to explain the 25th Amendment to these people who won't take the time to read the Constitution.
Only the cabinet.
Does the 25th Amendment automatically result in the removal of the president? No. What has to happen? Does the president have an opportunity to say, I'm fully capable of discharging my duties? Yes. So this guy assumes that once the 25th Amendment is invoked, he's out. But here's an opportunity to educate somebody and educate them about how the 25th Amendment works and how it doesn't automatically result in a certain
Can he
outcome.
personally defend himself or have lawyers defend him?
Well, it doesn't, it says that the president will address or will respond to the allegations. Obviously, he's going to have lawyers participate in the drafting of that document that he sends to Congress. So, number one, you're going to go research the 25th Amendment because it may be a year or two since you've read it. You're going to make sure you understand it correctly. And then you're going to explain to this guy how it actually works. And he's going to be better educated, and you're going to be better trained at making persuasive arguments.
It's funny because once this has been discussed recently, like really recently, people have gone back and looked at the 25th.
After the immunity decision, Trump v. U.S. was announced, I had probably 50 questions pummel me after that, and I ignored most of them, but there's a few of them I took. Because I wanted to marshal my arguments as to why that was a good decision and how people were blowing it out of proportion. It didn't say what they thought it said. You know, all it said was, lower court, you go figure out what's in the core constitutional actions of the president and what isn't, and we'll wait and see what you say. That's all the decision said. So it didn't make our president into the king that Sotomayor alleged. It didn't do anything that most of the left thought it did. So here's your chance to explain that. Here's your chance to explain exactly what the Trump v. U.S. decision did and didn't do.
Even at that, though,
I know.
if it would make Trump a king, if he got reelected, that would make Biden king right now.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point to make. So you know, this is an opportunity to become more adept at making persuasive political arguments. And this isn't a panacea. This isn't the only way to practice, to educate and train yourself to become a better
And it does
conversationalist.
plant a seed for people to go look at these things that they've only heard opinions about.
Right,
The
and you can
actual-
point that out. I often will link them to the clause of the Constitution that they're talking about in hopes that they'll actually go read it. So there's a lot of ways to use Quora. You're obviously using Quora.com for two purposes: to educate yourself and train yourself, and to educate others. So consider it. You know, it doesn't take a whole lot of time. You can answer one question a night or 100 questions.
I have a question because you talk about talking with the other side, and I think at one time, people used to have a common ground, was the Constitution of the United States. Does that common ground between left and right still exist?
It does.
Yuval Levin is convinced it does. And he says that that is our target,
I'm convinced.
to find that common ground and get back to
One of the first
Civil
things,
discourse.
one of the first things I figured out is that, and I found it very distressing, that the Constitution is not taught to our young people anymore. And what is being substituted is wrong stuff, like the Constitution doesn't bind the people. I saw that on a wall. It binds the government.
Yeah.
And most people don't even think about that.
Well, that's a whole nother discussion for another night, to what's happening in the education system and how to fix that. I'd love to go there, but I just wanted to plant this seed and tell you something that has helped me, I think, in being a more persuasive speaker and being able to educate people every night on sitting there at my computer. So I just offer it for what you think it's worth. So in summary, the left is becoming increasingly convinced that the Constitution must be replaced or undergo a major overhaul to, quote, save democracy. And more people are coming to this conclusion. So we have to marshal our arguments against this and show them why this is not a good idea. We must also fight them at the ballot box, obviously, but we also have to take these arguments to the public square. And that doesn't mean walking down or standing up at the top of Mount Trashmore and shouting your arguments at the top of your lungs. It means having quiet conversations with people that you know don't think the way you do, but you should take the time to explain why you think the way you do. We need to have more conversations like that. Yes?
Along those lines, this is not my idea, I picked it up somewhere, but it said to consider that the opponent that you're speaking with sincerely and kindly believes that they have the right answer. So if you can approach it that way, you won't step on their toes and cause a fight.
Right. And sometimes I get a little testy on Quora.com and I tell them this is stupid, the stupid question, maybe you ought to rethink this. But I try to be as diplomatic as I can.
I used to preface, or I try to preface when I'm talking this adversarial is, I know we don't agree on this, but hear me out. And that's basically, it disarms, it's not, you're wrong and I'm right. It puts it on a neutral ground.
So if nothing else, go out to Quora.com and look at some of the questions and answers that come up every day, 24 hours a day. Ron, good to see you again.
How you doing? You were mentioning that we're seeing more and more people advocate for the replacement of the Constitution. Is that really the case, or is it just in today's world, it's much easier to get the word out, various means? I mean, even during the forming of the country, it was a slim majority that wanted to form the country. And it's been like that throughout. Every time you look, it's a slim majority every time something, quote unquote, wins.
Well, I think there's no doubt that the internet has helped inflate perhaps the amount of people that are considering this.
But that's my point. Is it more people, or is it just louder?
It is more advocates.
Okay.
More advocates than I've seen before. And why their audience is, I have no idea. But some of them I note are in very persuasive positions and able to influence a lot of people.
Sir, thank you for your talk. And I appreciate the fact that you are bringing us to a focus of what can be done, what we should be doing. I like to tell people that we're one country, one nation under God, but we live and act locally. Can you speak to us about the grand jury and the mechanism it has in our constitutional structure as being separate from the other three branches of government, and the possibilities that it presents for us to affect some change in our reality?
Well, I know that the grand jury proposal has been out there for quite some time. I looked at it in depth about 20 years ago, and I have some misgivings about how effective that can be. But I'm willing to consider that the grand jury movement has potential. And I think more people need to be educated about it and the purpose of grand juries, citizen grand juries we're talking about, not necessarily judicial grand juries formed by a court. I'm still uncommitted on that question as to whether I'm fully in support of it or not.
Okay, no, we are out of time, so.
Yeah.
Where's the last?
I'll hope to inspire you.
Okay, good.
Okay, so,
There's plenty of literature out there to review.
all right, so let's thank All right, so now we're going to have some candidates speak. And first person up is Ron Axel. He wants to talk about CVA.